The sun dipped low over the endless expanse of the American frontier, casting long shadows over the parched earth. The sky burned with hues of orange and red, a quiet warning of the cold night ahead. Dust swirled across the open plains, pushed along by the ever-present prairie wind. This was a land untamed and unforgiving, beautiful, yet brutal in its indifference. Out here, survival wasn't a guarantee. It was something a man earned, with grit, patience, and a little bit of luck. And few understood that better than Jedediah "Jed" Collins, a cowboy who had carved a life for himself on the edge of nowhere. Jed's homestead sat miles away from the nearest town, tucked between rugged hills and a stretch of dry grassland that had once been home to bison herds and nomadic tribes. The barn, weather-beaten and gray, leaned slightly from the years of windstorms. The small wooden house beside it bore the same signs of time: chipped paint, a sagging porch, and silence that spoke louder than any voice. He wasn't always alone. Years ago, Jed had a brother who rode with him until a fever took him in the winter of '73. Since then, it had just been Jed, his horse Dusty, and a few cattle stubborn enough to survive the harsh seasons. People in town called him the Quiet One, a man of few words and fewer friends, not because he was cold, but because life had taught him not to expect much from others and to rely on no one but himself. Each morning began before sunrise. Jed would rise with the rooster, put on his worn leather boots, and tend to his chores, checking the cattle, fixing fence lines, chopping wood, and drawing water from the well. Days blended into each other like brushstrokes on a canvas, dusty, rough, and painted in the same dull colors. Despite the loneliness, Jed found peace in the rhythm of the land. The sound of the wind through the grass, the crackle of the fire at night, and the stars that stretched endlessly above reminded him that he was still a part of something greater, even if he couldn't quite name it. But there was another side to life on the frontier, one filled with danger, suspicion, and deep-rooted tension. The land wasn't empty when the settlers came. Native tribes had lived here for generations, their way of life intricately tied to the land. But as more ranchers, miners, and settlers pushed westward, that balance was shattered. Conflict became inevitable. Jed had always kept his distance from that struggle. He didn't join in when other ranchers called for militias or talked bitterly about savages. He didn't see enemies in the tribes, just people trying to hold on to what was theirs. Still, contact was rare. Neither side trusted the other, and silence was often safer than words. That summer had been particularly harsh. The rains hadn't come, the grass was yellow and brittle, and even the creek near Yetzland had shrunk to a trickle. The cattle were thinner than they should have been. Nights were cooler than usual. Jed sensed something was shifting, not just in the weather, but in the air itself. It was on one of those long, dusty afternoons that the story truly began. Jed was returning from checking a distant fence line when he saw something unusual just beyond the hill near the cottonwood tree. A figure, small, unmoving, lay at the edge of the grass. At first he thought it might be a calf or an injured animal, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a child, a native child alone, barely breathing, and clinging to life. What Jed did next wasn't planned. It wasn't calculated. It came from a place buried beneath years of hardship, a place of basic human decency. But in that single moment of compassion, Jed unknowingly set into motion a chain of events that would change his life, and possibly the fragile relationship between two worlds. Jed Collins dropped the reins and jumped down from his horse, boots thudding into the dry soil. The small figure lying by the cottonwood didn't move. His heart kicked up a notch, not out of fear, but urgency. As he approached, the shape became clearer. A boy, no older than 10, rail-thin, sun-darkened, and barely conscious. His black hair clung to his face with sweat and dirt, and his lips were cracked and dry. Jed knelt beside him. "Hey," he said softly, unsure whether the boy could understand or even hear. "You alive, son?" No answer, only a faint, shallow breath. Jed glanced around. No signs of others, no tribe, no tracks, no riders. Just this child, lying alone in the middle of the harsh plains. The cowboy didn't hesitate. He took his canteen and gently tilted it toward the boy's mouth. The child stirred weakly, lips parting just enough for a few drops of water to trickle in. "That's it," Jed muttered. "Easy now." The boy's eyes fluttered open briefly, dark, wary, and hollow. There was fear in them, but also something deeper. Exhaustion, hunger, despair. Jed could read it all in that fleeting glance. He wasn't used to caring for children. Hadn't been around one since he was a boy himself. But he knew what starvation looked like. And this child was on the brink. He made a decision. Lifting the boy into his arms, Jed carried him to Dusty and managed to set him across the saddle. The horse didn't protest. Sensing the seriousness of the moment, back at the homestead, Jed laid the boy on a pile of blankets in the corner of the barn, away from the animals but shielded from the evening wind. He started a small fire outside to warm some beans and boiled water for tea. Every few minutes, he checked on the boy, offering small spoonfuls of food and water, not too much, just enough to begin reviving his strength. Night settled quickly. with coyotes howling in the distance and the prairie wind rattling the old shutters. Inside the house, Jed sat by the window, watching the barn through the darkness. Shotgun across his knees, not because he feared the boy, but because he didn't know what would follow. No one wandered out here alone, especially not a native child. He didn't sleep much that night. His thoughts kept circling. Where was his family? Why was he left alone? Was he lost or abandoned? At dawn, the boy finally spoke, barely a whisper. Ma, dead. Jed leaned in. What's that, son? White men? The boy said faintly. Took the horses, burned the camp. The word struck Jed like a hammer. It was all too familiar stories he'd heard 100 times before. Raiders, settlers, soldiers. No one took the blame. But blood was always spilled, and the children paid the highest price. What's your name? Jed asked. The boy closed his eyes. Tamaqua. Jed nodded slowly. All right, Tamaqua, you're safe here. No one's gonna hurt you. The boy drifted back to sleep, his breathing finally steady. Jed sat there for a while longer, staring into the fire. Something in his gut told him this wasn't the end of it, not by a long shot. By midday, Tamaqua could sit up and drink broth. He hadn't said much more, but Jed didn't push. He just made sure the boy stayed warm, fed, and rested. Then, around late afternoon, Jed heard something strange, a distant thump, then another, and another. Hooves. He stood up quickly and walked outside, hand hovering over his holster, from over the ridge. Like ghosts rising out of the hills, they came. One rider, then 10, then dozens, a long, silent line of mounted native warriors. They wore war paint. Some held spears, others had rifles slung over their shoulders, and all of them were riding toward Jed's barn. 200 men, maybe more. Jed didn't reach for his weapon. He just stood in the dirt, watching the storm arrive, and knowing that his quiet act of kindness had just pulled him into something far bigger than himself. The earth seemed to tremble beneath their hooves. Jed Collins stood like a statue in front of his barn, eyes fixed on the ridge as more and more riders appeared, their silhouettes sharp against the golden sky. A single cowboy against 200 native warriors. His heart pounded in his chest, not out of fear for himself, but for the fragile child sleeping inside. The riders approached without haste. No whoops, no war cries, no drawn weapons. Just quiet, steady movement, like a procession, not an ambush. Jed didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he slowly removed his hat, lowering it in a gesture of respect. By the time they reached his property, they had formed a half circle in front of his barn. The warriors remained mounted, their faces stern and unreadable. Feathers fluttered in their hair, and painted designs marked their skin and weapons. Their horses shifted and snorted, sensing the tension in the air. Then, from the center of the line, one rider moved forward. He was older than the rest, dressed in a deep blue blanket with red stripes, his long gray hair braided down his back. A ceremonial staff rested across his lap, eagle feathers tied to the end, fluttered in the breeze. His expression was calm, but there was fire in his eyes. He stopped just a few feet from Jed. "You are the man who saved the child," the elder said in accented but clear English. Jed nodded once. Didn't know who he was, just knew he needed help. The elder looked past Jed toward the barn. "The boy is Tamaqua. He is the last son of our winter clan. We have been searching for him since the fires." Jed's brow furrowed. "He told me what happened. I'm sorry. He's alive, but he's weak. He needs time." The elder's face softened. He climbed off his horse with surprising ease for a man of his years. The warriors remained silent, waiting for his word. "I am Red Elk," he said, placing his hand on his chest. "Chief of the Broken Rock people, Jed Collins." Jed replied, "Just a rancher." Red Elk looked him in the eye, then extended his hand. Jed hesitated, then shook it firmly. "What you did," Red Elk said, "was not small. You gave water to the dying, food to the lost, shelter to the hunted. That is not the way of most white men." Jed glanced away. "Didn't do it for thanks. Just couldn't ride past him like he was nothing." Red Elk nodded. "That is why we are here." Jed blinked. "Here for what, exactly?" "To stand in honor, to show you our faces. You are not invisible to us, Cowboy." The weight of that statement settled over Jed like a blanket. In a land where men fought over dirt and pride, where trust between settlers and natives was thin as spider silk, this moment was something else entirely. Then Red Elk raised his hand, and the warriors dismounted in unison. It was a sight Jed would never forget. 200 warriors standing tall in solemn silence, not as a threat, but as a tribute. A younger warrior stepped forward and placed a bundle on the ground near Yet's feet. Inside was a woven blanket, smoked meat, herbs, and carved tokens. "For your kindness," the young man said. Jed looked down at the bundle, then back up at the circle of warriors. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. Red Elk placed a hand on his shoulder. "You said enough by what you did." Inside the barn, Tamaqua stirred. Hearing the voices, he slowly sat up, his small form framed by the soft light through the barn slats. When he saw the gathering, his face brightened, not with fear, but with recognition. "Grandfather," he whispered. Red Elk turned at the sound, his face cracking into the first true smile Jed had seen. He rushed forward, arms outstretched, and the boy met him halfway, stumbling into the embrace. There were murmurs of emotion from the warriors. A tribe that had lost too much had now regained something precious. Jed watched quietly, his rough hands gripping his hat. He wasn't a man used to gratitude. He never sought it. But seeing that reunion, feeling the weight of what he'd helped restore, was more than any words could offer. For the first time in years, Jed didn't feel alone, he felt seen. Evening settled slowly over the plains, turning the sky to a bruised purple, streaked with fading gold. The warriors had formed a respectful perimeter around the homestead, their horses grazing quietly, their bodies at ease. There was no threat. In their posture now, only presence. Jed Collins could feel it like a quiet drumbeat in the earth, a shared moment of peace. Rare and unspoken. Inside the barn, Red Elk sat beside Tomaqua, feeding him warm broth with the same gentleness a man might show his own son. The boy's strength had returned slightly, enough to sit up on his own and speak in hushed tones in his native tongue. Jed watched from the open barn doors, leaning on a post, arms crossed. He didn't want to intrude. He'd done what needed doing. Now he didn't quite know where he stood. Red Elk turned to him after a time. "He told me how you found him, how you fed him, warmed him, stayed with him through the night." Jed nodded slowly. "Didn't figure I could leave him out there." The old chief stood and approached. "Many would have." "That ain't right," Jed muttered, double quotes. "No, it isn't," Red Elk agreed. "But it is what we've come to expect from most who wear your boots." Jed didn't take offense. He understood the weight of the history between them, the blood spilled, the land taken, the lies traded for promises. His quiet choice to help a child didn't erase any of that, but it was something. "I ain't no hero," he said. "Just a man who saw a boy in trouble." "Sometimes," Red Elk replied, "it only takes one man doing the right thing to begin healing a wound too deep for words." Jed didn't know what to say to that, so he nodded again and went to fetch more firewood. That night, the warriors built a small fire circle near the barn. No weapons were shown, no guards posted. Instead, they began singing low, rhythmic chants that carried across the land like a heartbeat. Drums came out, softly played, and some of the younger men danced slowly in the firelight. It wasn't for ceremony, it wasn't for spectacle. It was for Tomaqua to let him know he was home again. Jed sat on the edge of the circle, a respectful distance away. One of the warriors, a tall man named Vakasa, handed him a bowl of spiced meat and root vegetables. Jed nodded his thanks and took it, eating quietly. It had been a long time since he'd shared a meal with anyone, let alone a tribe of warriors who'd once had every reason to see him as an enemy. Red Elk joined him after a while, his staff across his knees. "We will leave at sunrise," he said. "Take the boy home. He will need rest and safety." Jed looked into the fire. "I figured, he's strong, he'll make it. He lived because of you, and for that, we owe a debt." Jed shook his head. "Don't need no payment." "I know," Red Elk replied. "That is why you deserve it." He reached into a leather pouch and pulled out a carved stone pendant, shaped like a hawk in flight. Its surface was polished smooth, with a red streak of jasper running through it like a flame. "This is a mark of protection," he said, "of trust. Wear it, and our people will know you are a friend. Not just to Tomaqua, but to us all." Jed took it carefully, holding the cool stone in his calloused palm. "I don't know what to say nothing. Just live the way you already do." The fire cracked. In the distance, a coyote howled. Later, as the tribe settled into sleep under the stars, Jed stood outside the barn, the pendant hanging from a leather string around his neck. He looked up at the stars, ancient, unblinking, and for the first time in a long while, he felt part of something larger than himself. A bridge had been built, not through speeches or laws, but through one simple act, choosing kindness over fear. When the sun rose over the prairie, the warriors of the Broken Rock tribe were already mounted, gathered in a wide half-circle in front of Yet's barn. The boy, Tomaqua, now sat atop a painted pony beside Chief Red Elk, bundled in a warm blanket. Jed had offered, though still weak. The spark in the child's eyes had returned, the haunted, hollow look replaced with something brighter, steadier. Hope. Jed stood in the doorway of his cabin, arms folded, the carved hawk pendant around his neck catching the first rays of sunlight. He didn't say much, neither did they. There was no ceremony, no speeches, just a quiet understanding between men of different worlds. As they rode off, Red Elk raised a hand in farewell. Jed returned it, and then they were gone, swallowed by the horizon like a passing storm, leaving Jed alone again, but not quite the same. The days that followed returned to a quiet rhythm, but something had shifted. Jed felt it in the air, in the way the birds seemed to fly more erratically, in the strange stillness that lingered after sundown. Even his horse, Dusty, had grown uneasy, snorting and pacing more often. The silence no longer comforted, pressed in like a warning. A week passed before the first stranger appeared. "Jed," was working near the corral when he spotted the dust trail in the distance. A single rider, coming hard and fast. He squinted toward the horizon and didn't recognize the silhouette. That alone was enough to make him cautious. The rider pulled up fast, a man in his 30s, sunburned and scowling, with a rifle strapped across his back and a badge on his chest. Jed Collins. He called out. Jed walked over, wiping his hands on his pants. That's me. The man didn't dismount. Name's Marshal Rigsby. Heard a rumor you had some visitors recently. Jed kept his face still. This is open land. Plenty of folks pass through. Not 200 warriors. They don't, the marshal said flatly. Word in town is, you were harboring an Indian boy. Some folks say it was a scout. Jed's jaw tensed. He was a child, alone, starving. Rigsby's eyes narrowed, and now he's gone back to his people, who rode in armed and left without spilling blood. That makes folks nervous. Only folks looking for trouble, Jed said. The marshal studied him for a moment, then spat into the dust. I'm not here to stir things up, Collins, but I'd advise you to keep your head low. There's talk already, ranchers, militia, types, men who don't like the idea of Injuns riding so close to their land without consequences. Jed's hands curled into fists. That boy's family was murdered. His tribe didn't come for war. They came for him. That may be, Rigsby said, shrugging. But out here, truth matters less than fear. With that, he turned his horse and rode off, leaving Jed standing in a cloud of rising dust. That night, Jed sat on his porch, the hawk pendant cool against his chest. He knew what was coming. Trouble, suspicion, maybe worse. He'd seen it before. How one good deed could be twisted by men who needed enemies more than facts. But he didn't regret what he'd done. Not for a second. Still, he knew he couldn't sit idle. The next morning, he saddled Dusty and rode into the hills, not toward town, but in the opposite direction, along an old game trail that led toward the Broken Rock lands. It had been over a week since he'd seen red elk, but he needed to talk to someone who understood the weight of what was coming. By midday, he reached a bluff overlooking a small valley, where smoke curled gently from distant teepees. He dismounted and waited. It didn't take long. From the trees, 3 scouts emerged, weapons lowered but ready. Jed raised his hands. I come in peace. I need to speak with Red Elk. One of the warriors nodded. He's expecting you. Jed frowned. He is. The scout just smiled. You help the wind change, Cowboy, and when the wind changes, we listen. Jed followed the warriors into the valley and into the heart of a tribe, preparing for the storm that was sure to follow. The Broken Rock camp sat quiet beneath the tall pines. But Jed could feel the tension in the air like the low hum before thunder. Children played near the creek. Elders tended fires, and women stirred pots or wove baskets. Yet beneath it all was a subtle current of unease. Eyes watched him, not with hostility, but with guarded awareness. Word had already spread. Red Elk met him near the edge of the camp, surrounded by a few younger warriors. He looked older in the daylight, his face drawn tight with concern. But when he saw Jed, he nodded with calm respect. I knew you would come, the chief said. You felt the wind shift. Jed nodded. The marshal rode out to warn me. Word spreading. Ranchers, townsfolk, They think I'm working with you to start something. Red Elk's mouth drew into a thin line. And what do you believe, Jed Collins? Jed met his eyes. I believe you don't want war, but I also believe you'll fight if someone brings it to your door. The chief turned slowly and gestured for Jed to walk with him. Together, they moved through the village, past lean-to and drying racks of meat, past children who paused their games to stare. They see you as a man who chose honor over fear, Red Elk said softly. That's rare. I didn't come for praise, Jed said. I came because something's coming, and you need to be ready. We are, Red Elk replied. We always are. But readiness doesn't mean we welcome war. My people have survived too many winters, too many massacres. We don't want more blood, we want space to live. Jed glanced around the camp. It wasn't a war party. It was families proud, poor, tired, and clinging to their way of life on shrinking land. But he also saw the quiet preparation. Arrows being fletched, scouts leaving in pairs, elders consulting in low tones. You'll be blamed, Jed said. No matter who fires the first shot. Red Elk stopped walking and faced him. I know. Jed took a breath. So what do we do? The chief studied him. We hope the fire dies before it spreads. But we keep water ready. That night, Jed stayed in the camp. A small fire was lit near the council tent, and several elders gathered, including Tamakwa, who sat beside Red Elk. Though still recovering, the boy's spirit had returned. He greeted Jed with a shy smile and offered him a strip of dried meat. Brought me back, he said softly. Jed smiled. Just gave you a hand when you needed one. Red Elk cleared his throat. We have news. A younger warrior named Vikasa stepped forward. A scout rode to the settlement last night. Heard men talking at the saloon. A group plans to ride soon. A few dozen ranchers and drifters. They say they'll burn this place to the ground. Jed's jaw tightened. How long? 2 days. Maybe less. Silence fell around the fire. Tomaqua's smile vanished. Jed spoke up. You can't wait for them to come to you, but if you strike first, they'll use it as proof you're the enemy. We will not strike first. Red Elk said we will defend our home, but we need something more. Someone who can speak for us. Jed understood. You want me to go back? Speak to them. You are known to them, the chief said. Trusted more than we ever could be. Perhaps they will listen. Perhaps not, but we must try. Jed looked around the fire. At the faces, at the lives that hung in the balance. I'll go, he said at last, but I can't promise they'll listen. Red Elk nodded. We ask only that you try. That night, as stars wheeled overhead and the wind shifted once again, Jed lay awake near the edge of the camp. In the distance, coyotes howled, but beneath their cries was something deeper, older, a tension humming in the bones of the earth. A storm was coming, and he was the only man standing between peace and ashes. The next morning, the sky hung low and gray, as if the heavens themselves held their breath. Jed Collins saddled Dusty before dawn, every movement deliberate, silent. Warriors watched from a respectful distance as he prepared to ride, some with admiration, others with guarded hope. None spoke. They knew what this ride meant. As he mounted his horse, Tamaqua appeared at his side. Will you come back? The boy asked. Jed looked down at him, his weathered face gentler than usual. I am too, but I don't know what waits on the other side. Tamaqua held something out, a carved wooden figure, a bear with a chipped paw. For strength, he whispered. Jed took it, nodding. Thank you, little warrior. Then he rode. The trail back to the settlement was quiet but heavy, like riding into the mouth of a storm. By mid-morning, he spotted signs of movement, wagon ruts deeper than usual, scattered boot prints on dry ground. Near the bend of the old creek, he passed 2 men hauling crates of ammunition. They watched him, narrowed eyes full of suspicion, but said nothing. When he reached the town of Dry Fork, it wasn't the same place he'd left. The streets buzzed with tension. Men gathered outside the saloon and general store, some on horseback, others leaning on rifles. A wagon was loaded with dynamite, another with barrels of tar. The faces he saw, men he'd traded with, nodded to, at auctions, or tipped his hat toward, now looked different. Hardened, hungry for a fight. He tied up outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside. Sheriff Arnold looked up from his desk, startled. Jed, thought you'd gone full ghost. Had things to handle, Jed said. Now I'm back. We need to talk. Arnold leaned back in his chair. Let me guess. This about the Indian army camped near your ranch. Jed folded his arms. They're not an army. They're a tribe. Families. Children. You know that. The sheriff exhaled through his nose. I know you helped a kid. I respect that. But the rest of this town, they're riled up, Jed. Scared. Half of them been convinced by Doyle and the militia that the Broken Rock are planning a raid. Jed scowled. Doyle's a drunk with a gun and a grudge. Maybe, the sheriff admitted, but he's got 30 men following him, maybe more. They've got wagons, rifles, and worse, they've got the ear of the town. Then I'll talk to them, Jed said. Arnold looked at him like he was mad. They'll shoot you before you get a full sentence out. Then I'll speak fast. The sheriff stood. Jed, I can't stop them, but I won't stop you either. Jed stepped outside and made his way to the saloon. The crowd outside went quiet as he approached, all eyes on him. Some held their guns loosely, others crossed their arms. Among them stood Doyle, a former scout turned land baron, a man who'd lost 2 brothers in skirmishes decades back and never let go of the hate. Well, Doyle said, stepping forward. The hero Cowboy returns. I came to stop a massacre, Jed replied evenly. Doyle laughed, sharp and bitter. Massacre. We're the ones at risk. Jed, they sent 200 riders to your barn. You think they were coming for a picnic? They came for a boy whose family was murdered by outlaws, not your kind of justice. I gave him food, warmth, he lived. That's the whole damn story. Doyle's face darkened. That's your version. It's the truth, and you know it, the crowd murmured. Some shifted uncomfortably. Jed saw cracks forming. Not everyone wanted blood. Some just wanted peace, or at least a reason not to ride into a war. He raised the pendant Red Elk had given him. This was given to me by their chief. It means I'm trusted. It means they want peace. They're not preparing for a raid. They're preparing to defend themselves from you. A long silence followed. Then someone in the back muttered, I didn't sign up to burn women and kids. Another voice, maybe we ought to hear him out. Doyle's lips curled. You're being played, Jed. You trust them more than your own. Jed met his gaze, calm and unwavering. I trust people who do the right thing. If that ain't you, then maybe you're the one riding with the wrong side. For a long moment, no one spoke. The crowd outside the saloon stood frozen in uncertainty, caught between the weight of history and the hope of something better. Jed could feel it in the air, the tension of fingers itching on rifle triggers, the pressure of eyes looking for someone to make the next move. Doyle's hand hovered near his hip, too close to the revolver strapped there. Jed didn't flinch. You draw that? Jed said, voice quiet but firm. and you start a war. We can't walk back. Doyle sneered. You think I'm afraid? No, Jed replied. I think you're angry, and you want to make someone else bleed for it. But this isn't justice. It's vengeance. And it won't end where you think it will. Behind them, the murmuring grew louder. Men were exchanging looks, not of resolve, but doubt. The fever was breaking. A rancher named Bill Knox stepped forward, lowering the shotgun he'd been carrying. He's right, Doyle, this ain't it. I came here to protect my land, not burn down a village full of families. Another followed, then another. Doyle's lip curled in disgust. You're all cowards. Jed stepped closer. No, they're just tired of fighting ghosts, tired of spilling blood for pride. And if you're half the man you think you are, you'll walk away, before more lives get ruined. For a long breath, nothing moved. Then Doyle turned his head and spat in the dust. This ain't over, he growled, then turned and walked off down the street. Jed watched him go, not with triumph, but with relief. The rest of the men slowly began to disperse, some walking away in silence, others shaking their heads as if waking from a long sleep. The town had come to the brink, and, for once, stepped back. By sunset, Jed was back on the trail, heading west toward the Broken Rock camp. He carried no weapons, just the carved bear Tamaqua had given him and a message worth delivering. When he arrived, the sentries met him without alarm. Word had already reached the valley. Red Elk stood at the fire, waiting. Well, the chief asked. Jed nodded. They're not coming. A ripple of quiet relief passed among the warriors nearby. Not celebration, just a loosening of the shoulders, a release of held breath. You've done more than most men ever try. Red Elk said, you stopped something that's taken generations to understand. Jed stepped closer. I didn't do it alone. They were ready to believe in something better. They just needed someone to say it first. Tamaqua appeared beside the chief, a smile on his face. His cheeks had filled out, and his posture no longer slumped with weakness. He looked like a boy again, and a warrior in the making. You coming back to visit? He asked hopefully. Jed smiled. I reckon I might, if your Forcas'll have me. Red Elk nodded. You will always have a place here. That night, they shared a simple meal of venison and bread by the fire. Elders told stories of ancestors who had faced storms and survived. Children listened with wide eyes, and for the first time in a long while, laughter drifted into the night air. Jed sat beneath the stars, his hat tilted back, the wooden bear in one hand and the hawk pendant in the other. He felt something shift inside him, not closure, exactly, but a kind of peace. Not every scar could heal, and not every wrong could be undone. But sometimes, just sometimes, the course of history could be bent toward mercy. All it took was a man willing to stand in the middle. When the wind changed again that night, it was softer, no longer a warning, but a whisper of promise. The war didn't come, the guns stayed quiet, and a cowboy's one act of kindness echoed louder than any bullet ever could.